And hope you guys can all see that pretty good. I started with the Okanagan CD back in 2012. I worked through the 2014 and 2015 big fires in Okanagan County. So we did a lot of weird stuff that conservation districts usually don't do, and we made it up as we went along. I worked for a few more years kind of tidying up all the wildfire recovery projects, and then I took a little hiatus. I was a little burned out after all that fire work. We were doing long hours. And then I came back to help train planners. And I had actually been involved in the NRCS conservation planner training classes from the very beginning when I first started working for Okanagan. I also sometimes work for the Colville Tribal Conservation District, and do a couple different things there. I do a cultural plants. I help with a cultural plants project that they're working on, that the tribe has got a priority on, and then I also work with their Climate Smart program as well. So that's kind of my cred. And we're going to talk today about grant writing. And I wanted to do this class because I think there's a lot of information about grant writing. I mean, if I was to give you the one sentence the instructions for doing grant writing, it would be follow the directions. Okay, so if that does it for you, then you don't need to take the rest of the class. But I do think that there's a lot about the actual writing and how you write things that can help you win more grants. So I'm going to try to go over these with you and help you draft some compelling proposals, identify the right funding opportunities and where those are, building some skills within your organization to kind of make your grant applications more sellable. And then part of my hiatus was actually doing quite a bit of marketing work, and so I'm going to kind of bring a marketing mindset to grant applications, which I think it actually really is you selling your particular team, your particular programs, your particular projects. And if you don't kind of have that sales mentality about it, then oftentimes your grant applications will rank lower in the and when funders are looking at them. So we want to find the right kind of funding for your projects. We want to send the right messages, and we want to build and maintain the right structure. So I think that when your goal for grant writing is I'm going to drop some things here because I can't really see what I'm doing. Thanks for being patient with me, guys. Your goal in grant writing is really to present the best possible but honest picture of your organization. You don't ever want to stretch the truth, but you definitely want to give yourself credit where credit is due. You want to be selling your team and your program and your CD basically, but that you want that to be an honest assessment, but you don't want to be coming, as in any kind of sales, you don't want to be coming from, oh, please give us this money. We really need this money. That's not the perspective that actually gains respect with funders. They want you to be confident. They want you to understand what you're proposing. And they want you to have a clear presentation of your project and your program scope and purpose. Why are we doing this and how are we going to do it? And then they want a really responsible picture of how the funding will be used. So we're going to talk a little bit about budgets and the finance side of the grant applications as well. And our end goal really is to get awarded, but also to create a workable contract. And a lot of that comes from work that you can do in the opening stages of a grant application to make it more workable later. We'll talk a lot about this as we go along. So I do think we need to kind of start with our mindset and preparation. You need to be aware that grant writing is really detailed work. There's a lot of research involved in it if you do it well. You have to follow the directions almost slavishly, okay? If you don't follow directions, your grant applications will generally get put in the round file real quick. So you definitely want to be making sure that they're correct and accurate. And so you want to give yourself lots of time in order to accomplish this goal of writing this grant. You don't want to do these things at the last minute. You can, it's possible, but your grant applications will be so much more compelling if you give yourself enough time to do the work. So our first step really is to research your own organization first. I know that sounds weird, but you really want to have a clear picture of what the mission and the vision and the goals are of your own CD. And you want to have a firm grasp on that. You want to have a good idea of where your organization is headed, what kinds of projects you want to prioritize over others. Maybe you've got like a really cool thing that you want to do. You want to have all of those bits kind of in your DNA while you're writing this, okay? You're going to try to find existing funding gaps. So maybe you have a ton of money in water, riparian resources or something, and you don't have very much in education, and you want to do a little bit more in that field. So you want to be able to know where those gaps are. Maybe you've got some pretty good funding for your water quality projects, but you need match. So that's another place where you can kind of identify a gap. And then I would always be reading your long-range planning documents, any long-range planning documents from your county, from your municipal areas, from any like larger scale, all your partners that you plan to work with. Take a look at their long-range planning documents and get a good feel for what they are doing as well. And then you want to have a little idea about your own organization's. You want to be able to show that you have a clear track record of achieving goals. So you want to be able to say, we did this project, this project, this project. We did a great job. Here are our results. You would be surprised that even if it's not in your grant application, that grant funders are often looking at your organization and getting a feel for what you've already done and what you've succeeded at. So having an idea of that when you're writing the grant can really help you. You want to have that good reputation with other organizations and agencies, and you want to show other organizations and the funders that you have a reliable team and that they fulfill their responsibilities and that they have clear responsibilities and everything's above board and in a box, okay? And you want to actually be really sure that your own organization is ready for the added responsibilities of a grant. Sometimes these grants can be very large. Oftentimes they require a lot of financial reporting, a lot of like narrative types of reporting, and it takes time. So you want to make sure that you have enough staffing, you have enough staff hours available, that you have the capacity as an organization to actually fulfill the terms of the grant. So then you want to take a good step back and look at the funders. And actually, this is where some research kind of comes in. The funders, you want to know something about their organization, how it's organized, who's in charge of what. You want to know something about their mission and their goals and their forward-looking vision. And then you want a good feel for their short and long-term goals. What are they doing right now, and what do they want to do 5-10 years from now? So again, those long-range planning documents are really important to kind of go over. And a lot of this information is online, but I will warn you that you really do want to talk to somebody. We'll talk about this again in a minute. But you really want to talk with somebody in person at that organization and not just rely on their printed information. I'll tell you why later. So we need to talk for a minute about partnerships. Oftentimes when you're applying for a grant, they'll ask who your partners are in this particular project or program that you're trying to put together. Partnerships show the funders that you're committed to the program, that you have time and effort invested in developing these partnerships and building these bridges with other organizations, and it shows your willingness to continue working with them and to work with them very closely, especially if you've got partnerships involved in the grant deliverables, the things that you're actually going to do. If partners are going to do some of those things, you really want to build great, strong relationships between both the organizations and individuals within those organizations. That the funders really, really love that. If you can show that you are willing to go out of your box and talk to other people, that's a big deal. That will get you lots of points. Okay. I will talk for a minute about match. I think you guys kind of probably understand match on a cooperator level. On the super grant writing level, they may require some match from a different kind of program. And that actually shows that partner's commitment to the program, helps them look good in front of this grant funder. And I just wanted to mention that usually government match cannot be from an organization at the same level. So you can't match federal funds with federal funds. You can't match state funds with state funds, usually. Okay, now, so I will give you the caveat that will apply to everything in this class is every grant is different and every grant has its own little peculiarities. So maybe you find one that can match some other kind of same level, but generally this is not the case. So just be aware of that. I'm just going to give you some basic info. This is stuff that you probably already know, but I'm just going to go over it really quickly because it's stuff that most people in the general world do not understand about grants. A lot of people think that they can just, as a person, go and apply for grants. This is generally not the case. It's usually an organization that has to apply for a grant and then apply that to things that they're doing with individuals, but the individuals themselves cannot apply for a grant. Generally, okay? Just be very aware of that because you will see stuff all over the internet when you go searching for grants that say, here, you can apply for a grant, and you can't. It's not you, it's the organization. And each grant is really unique in their scope and purpose and format. So very important that you read carefully each grant, the materials that the grant or funder is putting out there, because you want to know that this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing for this grant. And any other grant that you've applied for, there's some general principles you can still use, but you really have to tailor it to that exact grant. Okay, so be very careful about that. Do not pay anybody to search for grants for you. Okay, there are a million places online where you'll go, yeah, here, I'll help you find grants. No, don't go do that. Anybody who's a reputable grantor will be advertising their information in one way or another. It might take a little digging, but do not pay someone else to search for your grants. It's a really good way to get scammed and to have your money taken for no good purpose that you could do yourself. You want to read the grant application materials really carefully and get a good sense of the grantor's expectations for what that grant is, what it's for, what the purpose is, what kinds of requirements it's gonna put on you. So definitely read those applications, all of them, all the pages, all the documents, read them all, okay? I know that it's tedious. I know that they go on and on, but read them anyway because if you set this whole thing up and then you can't comply with the terms of the grant, that is not going to be good. Okay, it's not going to be good in the short term for the grant that you're currently working with, and it's not going to be good for your grant applications in the future, especially with that funder, but even with other funders. So make sure that you really tightly stick with those expectations. And I would call or email. I would not just like assume that you know what a grant is from the grant materials. Call the grant manager. Talk to a human being, okay? I know that's weird and sometimes it's hard, but you really want to know what exactly how that grant is going to apply to your program or project that you're working on. So you might prepare like a rough elevator speech about your proposed stuff that you want to fund with this grant to make sure that your program fits. I've had experiences where I read through materials and thought, I have exactly the right project for this grant. It's written exactly I mean, it had the certain partners, and we had all those partners involved in the project. Everything looked above board. Everything looked like we were a slam dunk to get that grant. And I called the grant manager and asked him, and he said, it'll never get funded. And I said, are you kidding me? All of your materials, this would be perfect, perfect project for this particular grant. And he said, they're not going to work with anybody that has an agricultural producer. The entire grant was written for agricultural producers, but they weren't going to actually fund anybody that had an agricultural producer as part of the project. So go talk to someone in real life, because you cannot make this stuff up. It's just weird. I know it's weird. This is just how it is, and it's just how you have to go to get this money to get your projects done. But call them, talk to a person. So we'll talk about different kinds of grants. We have some federal grants. The federal grants can all be found on grants.gov. Grants.gov is a very behemoth website, so finding your grants on grants.gov is going to be the tricky bit. There are pros and cons to federal grants, particularly. The pros is that there's usually some larger amounts available. You can usually get bigger grants, and you can match to other levels. So your federal grants can match to state. Your federal grants can sometimes match to local projects, to local other local funding sources. The cons with federal grants, and these are large, is that there's heavy oversight. You will be nickel and dimed to death. The rules are very strict. They have very little flexibility for any changes, and they have usually a very difficult and long-term grant application process. So you want to make sure that if you're applying for federal grants, that you're willing to put the time in, and that you have the funds to put the time in to write the grant. Oftentimes their timelines get delayed, so sometimes that will impact how your payments come in, and you'll talk with your financial staff about that. Like, can you wait 6 months to get a payment back when you've vouchered for something? So also, what's really interesting about the federal grants is oftentimes you can't apply for them as a conservation district directly, that those funds are being distributed through state programs. And so federal funds, the federal grants will be given to particular organizations at the state level, and then you'll apply to the state, making it state money, making it a different way that you apply match. So it can be kind of complicated. But I will tell you that on grants.gov, there are some tricks for actually applying on grants.gov. You want to do the search on, if you go to grants.gov, on the left, there will be like a set of criteria that you can sort by. And you want to usually put in special district in the eligible organization section of that left-hand pane, so that you're not getting all the grants for everybody that, you know, is not a special district, but you're not qualifying because of your designation. But conservation districts are considered special districts in that federal system, so you can type that in or do the drop down for special district, and it will sort them and give you the ones that actually you're able to apply for. You want to put in keywords that really reflect your program focus and anything else that you want to make sure that the grant is going to fund. So you definitely want to put in your agency or category. So if you're doing agriculture or natural resources or education or something else, you want to sort by those categories. So just make sure that when you're doing your left-hand pane, that you're putting in info that will narrow that range of opportunities down, because you'll get things like, you know, doing AIDS research in Africa. Okay, those are not going to be applicable to you. So definitely do a good job of searching and sorting in that search bar. Let's talk for a minute about the state grants. The state grants in Washington, it's weird. I've lived in other states and they have had a place where the state grants are kind of listed all together. In Washington, this is not true. Each department kind of announces their own grants, and there's not really a centralized clearinghouse. There wasn't, at least. Maybe Jan can chime in here. I don't know if there is now, but I've never experienced a central clearinghouse for state grants. Our pros for state grants are that there's kind of more moderate oversight, less onerous than the federal oversight. There's little bit more flexibility for changes. There are good hefty grant amounts. So if you want to do big things, you can look at state grants. The cons are they can be difficult to find. So, you're going to have to go to all those different departments to find the correct lists of grants that are available. And then each agency has their own rules, their own personality, their own things that they're looking for. So you're going to have to really do some research on those departments. You might have to talk to local staff and get the inside skinny on what things are going on with grant writing in that particular department. So just be kind of organized about your searches for state grants. When you apply for state grants, you got to first find the appropriate agency and then go sign up for their email grant announcements. Each agency will usually have like an email list. And if you get on that email list, you'll get sent the upcoming grant opportunities. And then there is kind of a shortcut, and that is to work with WSCC or with grant funds that you've already used for your CD for particular kinds of programs. So maybe you're using the same old grants that you're always getting. That's okay too. Don't have to go outside the box too much. There's a lot of money. We do have a tighter budget at the state level right currently, but and we don't, there's a lot of federal shifting around going on as far as where money is going and where it's coming from. But there's usually a good solid set of grants available through the state. And WSCC is going to know about any of them that will apply to conservation district type programs and projects. Okay, so there are some other ones. We oftentimes work with the state funding, but there are some other stuff out there. And I want you to, I'm just going to do some kind of general ideas about these things. You're going to have to really research your private organizations and businesses and things like that, and really vet these folks as carefully as you possibly can. Definitely talk with their grant managers about what is available, what the rules are. They're the Wild West. There's a huge amount of stuff out there, and some of it is complete crap, and some of it is great. So you're going to have to really look carefully and vet these sources for grants and funding. So watch your step. Don't pay for searches. Don't pay for grant searches again. Don't use the top 10 grants for X lists. Most of those are sponsored by the people that are giving those particular grants, and they'll rank themselves at the top and everybody else at the bottom. So unless it's an organization or a consumer reports kind of organization, I wouldn't use any of those top 10 grants lists. And then again, you're going to really vet your organizations well. Find out about them, learn about them, talk to them. Local nonprofits can actually be a really good source for more private types of funding. You might ask other local organizations who they've used before. Sometimes you can set up partnerships with local nonprofits. You can ask your other partners and find out if they have a line on a local organization that's giving out particular kinds of funding. Now, usually these private and organizational grants are less money. You're gonna have to, like I say, put a little more time into it, but they're usually fund less, especially for some reason in education. Like when we try to find grants for educational projects, those are like $5,000 or $2,000 or $500. And then you have to kind of play this risk and benefit. Am I going to get enough money to even justify the time I spend writing the grant? So you want to be watching your amounts that you can receive from these. There are some grants done by private businesses. Um, and sometimes those are done through foundations associated with the businesses. So Gates Foundation is a good example. Sometimes those, if you've got something that you want to do that's really weird and wacky and putting together a lot of different people from different fields, sometimes these can be really helpful because they can bridge that gap between, the same old stuff in a box. We're only going to do the things that are in the box, which is generally your state and federal programs are sort of, you can't really mess with them. But these business grants can be really interesting to work with if you have some of these ideas where you're joining together. We were talking when I was working for the Colville Tribal Conservation District, we were looking into some grants for cultural plants. Well, cultural plants are both a plant, so they're kind of botany, right, and science, and then you eat them, so that could be health, nutrition, food sovereignty. There's all kinds of pieces there that are different than, your normal sciencey grants. So whenever you're doing these kind of different outside the box kind of projects, you might look into some of these business grants. So this is possibly the most important piece of this whole talk. There's lots of important pieces, but this might be the most important piece. Does it fit? So when I talked before about making sure you understand what your organization is doing and then understanding what the funder's goals are, do they match up pretty closely? You do not want to be writing for a grant because you think, oh, well, that's kind of way out there, but I could make it fit with what we're doing already. No, don't do that. Don't waste your time and all your energy, and trust me, all your brain power, writing a grant for something that does not already match well. So vet your grant application information very well and make sure that those goals match up with each other, okay? And then you're going to ask yourself some questions. Is somebody else already doing this program, project, whatever? Is someone else doing it? That's not necessarily going to kick you out, but if I was a grant funder, I would say, well, if this other organization is doing it, why should you do it too? So you definitely want to be thinking about, why is your program different? Do you have some really cool thing that's different than what everybody else is doing? Maybe you're pulling in different partners than the other group is doing, but you want to be able to communicate that within that grant application because that will be a question that your funders will have. So number 3, are the grant requirements really realistic for our organization? Are we going to have enough capacity? Are we going to have enough funds in other ways to make this actually happen? So make sure that the grant requirements for this grant that you're applying for are realistic for your organization. Are the reporting requirements reasonable? Sometimes you get into some of these grants and the reporting requirements take so much time and so much effort that it's not even worth it really to do the grant because it's so onerous to do the reporting that it's taking way too much staff time or capacity to take care of the reporting. Number 5, will the amount of this grant be enough, or are we going to need match from someone else? So that's something to think about. Are we going to need match from landowners cooperators? Are we going to need match from another organization? Are we going to need match from a nonprofit? Make sure that you kind of think about that piece, those different funding parts working together. And then on the actual doing it side, do you have partners that will help do stuff like on the ground? Are they going to do some monitoring? Maybe they're going to do some of the evaluating. Maybe they're going to do maybe they can do the reporting. That would be great. Usually if you're the one that's applying for the grant, you're going to be doing the reporting, but it is possible that some of those tasks can be kind of sorted out with your partners. Okay, we're going to take a little break here. I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat. Does anybody have any questions right now? Can't see your faces, so maybe If you have a question, just raise your hand. I can't see that either. Okay, I'm not hearing any jumping to questions, so I'll just keep going and keep thinking about your questions, and we'll answer them at the end. Okay, so when you're writing the grant, there's some very important things to be taking into consideration and to doing very carefully. So we talked before about reading and following the directions. I cannot say that enough. Read and follow the directions. Oftentimes, you will go through the entire grant writing process and go to upload something, and there will be one little 3-word phrase in the middle of that grant that you missed, and they'll send it back and say you didn't do this thing. So way better to just read super carefully. As I'm writing a grant, I am actually rereading the instructions, okay? 2 or 3 times or more, just to make sure that what I'm putting in there is exactly what they want, and I'm ticking all the right boxes. If I have a question about something, I'm going to call the grant manager and make sure that I have the right definition, or that I'm doing things an appropriate way, using the format correctly. There's just a million things to be kind of paying attention to. So just be meticulous about that. You really want to watch your application deadlines, okay? Those deadlines are pretty solid, and they're usually not going to just let you slide past a deadline. So you really want to be organizing your time ahead of time to make sure that you're getting the things done that need to happen before the deadline. You want to give yourself plenty of editing time. Trust me on that one. So I would recommend that you break your work into discrete steps. Today I'm going to work on the short description narrative, and tomorrow I'm going to work on the first few paragraphs of the long description, and the next day I'm going to work on, outlining the whole thing. Whatever those steps are, today I'm going to work on the budget, rough budget spreadsheet, and then I'm going to take another day and put it all into their format that they require. You want to allow yourself tons of time for editing. Do not underestimate the amount of time it takes to write these things, okay? And this is actually another reason to be really careful about which grants you write, because it does take a lot of resources actually to get grants written. You want to allow a lot of time for prepping your financials. Those budget spreadsheets, even if you know your numbers already, like you know what everybody's charge out rate is and you know what all the pieces are, you're still going to have time for your financial team to go over those financials as well. So allow lots of time for that piece. I find that the budget is deceptively brief compared to how much time it takes to write. And then again, you want to make sure that everything is complete and accurate. And if you don't, they will throw it back at you. And, having it thrown back at you is actually not a bad thing, because then you learn what they actually want, which is sometimes really helpful to know. So you definitely can, don't be afraid of throwing it in there and having it come back, but you want to have enough time to be able to edit it. So don't, go to the last minute and then have it pop back, right? Upload it early if you can, and then if it pops back, you have time to edit and resubmit. So be careful about that. Somebody has a question. If you're aware of a grant that's about to open based on a recurring grant and you've never applied to this grant before, do you start writing and editing before the application and rubric even opens? Sure, absolutely. You can write content to your heart's content. You can go and then stick it into their format. If you have examples of the grant application, great. Write all that stuff ahead of time. Yes, I would totally recommend that you do that. That's a great comment. Yes, do that. Okay, I'm going to talk for a minute about actually writing the thing. And I'm going to make you some suggestions about kind of how to approach this. I think of it sort of as a roller coaster, okay? You're going to be looking from the 30,000 foot view, and then you're going to be looking at the super details, right? You're going to be kind of popping back and forth between here's our main, like, this is what how we want to change the world and how we want it to be different 10 years from now, to we are going to do, 5 mailers this week, and we're going to do 16 ads next week, and we're going to go talk to that cooperator and do 5 assessments. You're going to be popping between those two levels very frequently. So we're going to start with brainstorming, and I want you to be thinking in this brainstorming mind dump kind of stage to use as active a language as you can. People going, people doing, people acting, people, um, dipping nets in a creek. Try to get as much active language in there as you can. You're going to do a lot of free writing. Just write, and do not worry about spelling, do not worry about context, do not worry about anything. Just write. This is especially useful when you're trying to figure out what your program and your project actually is just write about it and write about it and write about it. And then what will happen is you'll start to see themes come through. You'll start to get words that will help you make more compelling copy later, okay? Another really useful tool that I use all the time is word webs. To take your main program goal, stick it on a piece of paper, circle it, and then start finding words that relate to that. And they don't have to be anything that has to do with the project, but any word that relates to that word. And just, make another circle and connect them together. And then take that word and do the same thing with that word. What that does is give you a ton of vocabulary that you can use to describe this. And you can vary the vocabulary while still talking about the same thing. So word webs are super helpful for developing the actual content, the copy that you're going to be writing. And then as you're kind of coming down from that 30,000 foot, we're just thinking about everything kind of stage, we get down to answering actual questions, and we'll talk about this more later. But make sure you talk about who and where and what and why and how. All those pieces of this project or this program. What are they about? What are you going to do? Who's going to do it? Where are they going to do it? Make a map if you need to. There's lots of different pieces of that brainstorming idea that you're just going to pull all this. You're going to generate a bunch of stuff, and then you're going to edit it down. Okay? So I like to do grant writing and most everything else actually as a timeline and sort of like a storytelling form, right? Human beings are, if I say once upon a time, people instantly like go, okay, there's a story, right? And their focus is brought to that story. And so that our brains are just made that way. And so that can totally be used in a grant application. Now that seems like fiction, but you can write it about nonfiction as well. You can write it about your project and your program. But I would do it chronologically for one thing, as if it was a journey. So we had this situation. This is what it was like at the beginning. It changed somehow over time. Then we're proposing to change it in this way, and then this is what the end result is. And to do it in a timeline like that puts it in a story kind of format, and you'll get a lot better response than if you're just kind of saying, well, we got this and we got this thing and we're going to do that thing over there. If you put it in a chronological order, it actually makes it flow better, it'll read better, and people will respond to it better. So I also want you to think about visualizing and describing what the actual end result is. And this is hard to get to actually, because you might say the end result is that we put 900 plants in this riparian area. That is not the end result. Why would you even put 900 plants in a riparian area? So you want to ask yourself over and over again, why? Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing that because plants, help filter the water. And then we get clean water at the end of it. That's a real end result. So you really want to go through all the actions and activities to what the actual goal is at the end. And then you might include things about how did you overcome the challenges. This is another storytelling kind of piece. Like, it was here, then those people had this problem, then we worked really hard with them to do complete assessments that we wanted to figure out what the best result would be. How did we overcome, 15 objections from the landowner about what we're doing? Um, Talk about the challenges, talk about how you overcame them. That will help the funders actually get an idea of how you problem solve and that you're willing to take the time to do that. Oh, did I go backwards? There we go. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little piece of marketing. And this, you can dive into this as deeply as you want, because actually grant applications are marketing pieces. And yeah, and it's helpful to kind of think about them that way. So we've talked about it as a story, but we're also talking about it as selling something. What are we selling? We can sell our team or our organization, but what we're actually selling, if we keep going into that why, is a better world, or people behaving better, or more information happen, like more people getting more information. What is it that we're actually selling in this program or this project? Why are people buying things? What you go online and you go on social media and an ad will pop up. Now, why would you respond to that? Why would you actually buy the thing? There's lots of reasons why people do that. So they can have perceived needs and desires. Um, they might be looking for purpose or meaning in their life. Sometimes it's like, you got to do this right now. Oh my gosh, the marketing that's done on do it in the next 20 minutes or it's going to go away forever. That's something that people just instinctively kind of respond to. We got to act now, right? We got to do something now. And then sometimes they're just basically entertainment. More and more in our lives, we're buying things because we like to be entertained and we enjoy things, right? There's a lot to these different sections, so I encourage you to go look more into marketing and kind of apply those to this idea of a grant application. How do we encourage them to buy? We first have to capture their attention, which is why the active language, which is why a good, clean, concise description of things is really important. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But you can encourage immediate action. If we don't do X right now, this is what's going to happen, right? Something bad will happen if we don't do this right now. So that can pull that little sense of urgency into your copy. And then all of us have that fear of missing out. So one of the reasons I think that partnerships are such a big deal when you're writing grants is because if you've got 2 or 3 groups working together to do something, some other organization is going to say, well, how come we're not involved in that, right? We have a fear of missing out on the cool stuff. Always remember when you're writing grants that you're applying to a person or a team of people, and people have psychology, okay? So just remember that some of this marketing is psychology. How do people work? What do they respond to? And your grant application is the same. You may think that a grant application is actually just like, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to pay for it. And that's absolutely not what it is. It's absolutely, how do we get people to buy into our vision of what's happening? They will not necessarily even count the zeros at the end of their grant amount. Okay, they will not, if they can feel like that vision is happening and they're participating in it. So these funding organizations and people are reading a ton of applications, and I encourage you to keep them awake. Make it exciting, make it fun. You don't have to put exclamation points after everything. You can do it in a serious and businesslike tone, but use your active voice. There are tricks to writing that will help you do that. So I'm just going to give you a few, okay? But you can go diving deeper into this as well. So your writing style and your tone, there's some tricks to this. You don't want to be afraid to repeat your main points. That person is reading through these pretty quickly and they may miss it the first time. So don't be afraid to repeat over and over again what you're doing, where you're going with it, okay? You're going to do it in your short description. You're going to do it in a longer description. Don't be afraid to have it pop up in other sections. Maybe you have a little description about the finances and you're going to refer back to that main point. Where are we going? What are we proposing to do? Vary the delivery. do the word web thing because it'll give you lots of different vocabulary to describe the same thing. And then you can say that same thing 100 times and not have it sound like the same thing 100 times, okay? It's very good to avoid passive prose. I don't know if you know what that means, but that means words like I am walking versus I walk. Okay, the active, not passive voice in your language will really help people connect with you and feel like taking action. Okay. Also, being over wordy. Do not just throw a bunch of words on the page. Edit down to the most important things, the most active stuff, the words that get you to the point as quickly as possible. And I would favor clean, bright, active words. Okay. Hopeful, actually. A lot of times when we're working in conservation or environmental issues, we can tend to get down in the dumps about stuff and how terrible it is because it's, there's some terrible stuff. But if you want people to pay for something, they would need to see hope in the future. So use those clean and bright and active words to help them see a picture of something getting better. Okay. And then I always like to link my paragraphs and concepts from paragraph to paragraph, say something at the end of a paragraph, and then say, as an example of this thing you just talked about, I do this and this and this. You're linking those paragraphs together. And your concepts can be linked together as well. So think about that. And then you want to definitely explain out any technical terms that you're using. Even if you know that your funders are well versed in the science of stuff and they will know what a riparian area is, the first time, it may be a finance person that's reviewing this. They may not know what the heck you're talking about. So the first time you use a technical term, you should describe it, spell it out. Tell somebody in English what it actually is, okay? In some pretty simple terms, so that it's not sounding like a scientific paper. Oh, one more thing. Sorry. Goldilocks level. When you're describing these things, you don't want to go too deep and you don't want to go too shallow. You want to give people enough information, but not drown them in the details, okay? You're going to have word limits and character limits in your applications oftentimes. And so you want to take that kind of middle of the road. You don't want to just say, we're going to do some stuff. You want to say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're not going to say we're going to do X and do it 67 times, and then we're going to do Y and we're going to do it 500 times. That Goldilocks level is what we're shooting for. Okay, so the format, I'm not even going to talk about the format. Every single grant has a different format, and they're going to ask for it in a different, I don't know, some of them are online forms, some of them are written forms. Oftentimes, like I say, there are word limits. Those are all different for each different grant. So just go read the application and make sure that you've looked through the form, you know what all the terms mean. If you have questions, ask your grant manager. So for content, I would write all my content first. And as we talked about before with our great question earlier, yes, write a bunch of content and then you can edit it, fit it in, tidy it down to the word limits or whatever. But I wouldn't write my executive summary first. I would write it last because what's going to end up happening, one of the cool things about writing is you're going to learn a lot about what your program actually is by writing about it. You're going to get a lot more clear on what your project and your program are as you're writing all this stuff. So get your content down and then write your executive summary because then you're going to be able to do that job a lot more clear, a lot more concise. You're going to get to the point. You're going to really understand what the problems are. You're going to focus on the problem and the solution. So what are we going to do about it? So focus on the problem and then focus on a solution. And you're going to take that down now that you've got kind of a general description of stuff, you're going to take it down to goals and objectives. You're going to take it down to what is actually going to happen and then how we're going to make those things happen. So our content structure usually, and again, this is sort of that chronological idea that we talked about before. So the background, what's the historical context? What is the setting? what was going on before things changed, and then what changed. The current status, what is it like now? This is where your NRCS assessments or other assessment tools come in. You're establishing those baseline conditions. You can talk about that quite a bit. What are your cooperators' needs and desires? And then what are other local, and when I'm saying environmental trends, I'm not necessarily meaning like the physical environment, but more even like cultural and human aspects of those things that are happening in that area right now. Proposed actions, what are we going to do? Usually in our world, that's going to be proven best management practices. Those are going to be the NRCS practice standards. Not always, but most of the time. We want to show that those practices are going to be good value for the money spent. So we're going to kind of take this idea of this is other people's money. We're proposing to spend it responsibly. What's the most responsible way that we can spend it to achieve the result? Okay. And then we're going to tie that these proposed outcomes, these proposed actions to the big picture outcomes. How is what I'm doing or proposing to do right now going to fix that thing and make it look different 10 years from now? Okay. And then we want to talk about our expected results. How is it going to change? What's going to change on the ground? How are you going to measure that? And then are there going to be people's changes, behavior changing and attitude changing happening? So you can describe that. We're going to talk about this again, these questions. We're going to anticipate all these questions and hope to address them all. There will be questions. Just be aware that people will usually have questions about what you're writing. But if you try to anticipate as many of the questions as possible, that will help. And we talked before, these W's and H's, right? What and why? What are we doing and why are we going to do it? Who's going to be doing it? Are our cooperators involved? Are there partners involved? When are we going to do it? Oftentimes they'll ask for a timeline or a Gantt chart or some way of telling this is going to happen first and then this other thing. Where is it going to happen? Make maps. Make maps because people cannot visualize where stuff is happening unless you point it out on a map. Draw a diagram of the practices on the site. Make sure that people kind of have that spatial awareness of where these things are going to happen. And then finally, how much of things are we gonna use and how much space are we gonna, these are the kind of the more technical descriptions of the project. 500 feet of shoreline, 50 yards away from the shore. How much of things are we doing? How many feet of pipeline are we proposing to put in? Okay, so we want to kind of distill all this down into deliverables. And I put this little checklist here because we want our deliverables to be something that we can check off. Okay, that we did 5 outreach events, we did 900 feet of pipeline, we did this. Okay. Now I want you to think about this. We talk often about SMART goals being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And I think that if you take what we've talked about so far and you've been doing all that writing, that your goals, if you get them specific enough, will come in with all 5 of those pieces. Okay. I just want to make you aware that when we talked about going towards a contract, right? When you get down to making this contract, you're applying to make a contract, that contract will hold you accountable for meeting your deliverables. So you want to think carefully about what those deliverables are going to be and whether you actually feel like you can do them. Okay. That again, you're gonna by this point in your writing, you should have a pretty clear idea of what the individual pieces are. But sometimes at this point, you're adding numbers to that. You're adding how many events and what kind of response you want to get from it and how many people are going to sign up for X, right? But you will be accountable for meeting those deliverables. And then in your final summary, I want you to repeat the what and why again. The details are not quite so important in that little final summary. What's really important is the vision and why you want to get there, okay? Those are the most important bits in the final summary. And that final summary may be within the long description. It may be a separate section. I don't know what your format's going to look like. So again, read your application and see what they want. So let's talk for a minute about budgets and financials. I know a lot of you are probably here for that part. We're going to do the same kind of process that we did with writing that we're going to do with our budgets and financials. We're just going to have numbers attached to them. So I would start again with a brainstorm. I would think as big as you can think. If I had all the money in the world and wanted to solve this problem, how would I do it? What would I do? Oftentimes we're coming from, and this is true for me as well, coming from a background where we're penny pinching, we're watching every dollar. This is not the time to be counting every dollar. Okay, this is think as big as you want to think. Be mind-blowingly big. If you had $1 million, what would you do? Okay, then you're going to refine those ideas down by what's reasonable, and but you still got that kind of big picture. How is this fitting into a bigger scope, right? So we're going to refine our scope for this particular grant into the things we're going to do right now, and then we're going to detail them out. And I would actually get pretty specific about these things. So say you have to go buy a bunch of pipe. I would go get an estimate of how much that pipe is going to cost per foot and how many feet I'm going to need. I'm going to pull all those little details of that project and put them into a spreadsheet. And I'm going to give you kind of a rough spreadsheet, rough budget spreadsheet that you can use. You're going to want to think through your project because each project is a little bit different and has different pieces. But things you don't want to forget to include, because these are things that will cost money, are the administration, and then the actual management of the project, and then any goods and equipment, hiring specialists, anything like that, okay? So definitely consider, maybe you've got a cooperator that is 80 years old and they can't do their own work. So consider what it's going to cost to hire somebody to do it. This happens all the time. So don't get yourself stuck in, we can't because of X. Find a way to figure out what the problem is and solve the problem, okay? You can hire contractors, you can hire specialists. Oftentimes we're hiring engineers, where sometimes we'll use our beautiful engineer pool at the WSCC level, but oftentimes we're using contractors, right? Figure out how to make the project happen. Consider dividing your work between the staff of your own organization and your partner organizations if you can. Sometimes you can't, but if you can, it'd be great. And even encourage better working relationships with those partner organizations to divide up some of the deliverables between you. And always remember also, we've got education and outreach. No one's going to know about your project unless you advertise it, right? No, the little kids are not going to learn about water quality without somebody to teach them water quality. So we're going to, when we can't always do this, but when we can, we're going to always put all these extra pieces in there besides just the project information. So here's our little quick rough budget worksheet. I put in some little examples. So the administrator, we're going to say he's going to work 20 hours. The director is going to work 20 hours on this thing at $75 and get the charge out rate, not the rate that that person is paid in their checking account, but the actual charge out rate, which includes all their benefits and stuff like that. Get their charge out rate, put them in a spreadsheet. You can make a template like this and then use it again and again, making sure you update these numbers. So you're going to do how many hours and how much is that going to cost. Your admin assistant is going to cost $35 an hour and it was going to work for 30 hours. And so that's how much it's going to cost. On your project management section, you have a planner, you have a support person maybe. In this section, you're going to put things like the actual project costs, which I'm hoping you're doing in a spreadsheet per project. So each little cooperator has their own little spreadsheet like this. You're going to include your outreach. You're going to include these separate project entries for labor, materials, and services, maybe engineering, maybe other things. And then you're going to take all these totals and add them up. And then you're going to add something called indirect costs. Now, it costs the conservation district something to pay the light bill. It costs them something to pay someone to plow the parking lot. Those are things that can't be ascribed to a particular project, but that still need to get paid for. Those are called indirect costs. And those costs, there's kind of a customary number of 10%. Sometimes your grants will not even allow indirect costs, or they'll have a particular percentage that they use. So you want to find out what that is. And then there's something called contingency. This is if something goes wrong, a percentage that you're going to put in as kind of a buffer between the actual things you think it's going to cost and what it might cost. And so sometimes the people oftentimes will not allow contingency, but you can take this number and actually work it up into your other numbers, adding 10% to each of those other budget items, and then that will cover your contingency, if that makes sense. Now, I put this little picture of a lady on the beach because after you do editing and review, you're going to want to go to the beach. It's going to be very exciting and hard work, and you're definitely going to want to take a break after you're done with it because your brain will probably turn to mush. So we're going to talk about editing and review. It's not fair that it's only one slide because this is what takes, I would say, at least 75% of your time. All that brainstorming and stuff is the fun part. The editing is getting a little more in depth, and take breaks. I'll give you tips. Take breaks. Go to the beach after. Working closely with your supervisors and directors and finance staff to help review is great. That will really help. Anybody else's eyes on the thing will help you to do a better job and to write a better grant. I would actually have folks who are not really familiar with the program that you're trying to create to read sections so that they can catch any unclear or inconcise areas, and that they understand what the gist is, even if they're not really up on all the technological words. And then I always like to read it out loud to myself to make sure it makes sense to me. Your auditory and your reading brain are two different things. And if you actually read it out loud, you'll oftentimes catch mistakes or unclear pieces or things that don't flow well if you read it out loud to yourself. I would make, okay, I say one last run through. This is after you've run through it about 20 million times, but one last run through and make sure that all your numbers and your references match. So say you've quoted a long-range plan document to support your going after this grant. Make sure that the page numbers are correct. If you've got something that you're like a table of contents somehow in that grant application, make sure that the page numbers match up with each other. Okay, do like a cleanup at the end of all the pieces. Then you get to do this. You get to push the button. And every time anybody I've ever met has written a grant, I do a celebratory yell and wave my arms around. And I've often thought that I needed a little pop gun with confetti because this is a grand accomplishment. If you have pushed the button on a grant application and you have written that thing and sent it off, you should feel a great feeling of accomplishment because that is a hard job. It is very time consuming and definitely something that will tax your brain, and it'll teach you things. It'll actually like improve you as a person. So good for you. Pop gun for you every time you finish a grant application and send it off. Now, what ends up happening after that is what we're going to talk about next. What do we do now? We're going to hopefully contract, and that part will be done by directors and grant managers and finance staff, and they will take care of all that contracting part. And once the contract is complete, then it comes back to you as a planner to do some of the reporting part, okay? And sometimes you're doing the narrative portions, and sometimes you're doing some financial reporting as well, or working with the financial staff to include information so that they have the correct information. But you definitely want to be following up and follow the rules. Make sure that you're complying with the requirements of the grant and that you're only charging for things that need to be charged to that are allowed under that grant. Don't go overboard with reporting. Report only what they want you to report. Find out what it is and what format they want it in and how they want it, and give them just that. Don't give them any extra. That will just waste their time and you will waste your time. And so it's no fun. On the financial reporting side, your financial staff is usually tracking expenses, so you're going to be working closely with them. They are going to be wanting to do timely vouchering. So whenever you get receipts, whenever you get stuff that needs to be applied to that grant as far as financial accountability, please get it to them as quickly as you can, because they have their own processes that they need to go through in order to voucher. And then oftentimes it takes them more time to get the payments back on the vouchers. So you definitely want to be thinking in how can I organize my time with this reporting side so that I'm doing things well in advance and not doing things at the last minute. Okay, so we have I appreciate you guys being here. Our next Toolbox webinar will be Agreements in Action, Foundations for Conservation Collaboration. This class is going to be about contracting, about a little bit about conservation planner liability. Anyway, so this is going to be another class that we'll do next Thursday at 9 o'clock. And I'm wondering if there are any questions that I can answer. Could I put the Excel budget spreadsheet up again? I will, and also I'm sending it to you. So Jan has nicely agreed to take the uploads, which will include a couple of other things as well. The PDF of the slides, the outline that I've used, which has a little bit more detail, and then also the rough budget that I showed, and another rough budget, and I think I put also another grant, like a sample grant application. It is not a conservation district type of grant, but it will give you an idea of what a grant application format kind of looks like. So there's your rough budget worksheet. Thank you so much, Corey. I appreciate that. Any other questions? And I think, can you speak to ChatGPT? Yes, I can. This is a great question. Can I speak to ChatGPT and the utilization of this as a tool, comments, warnings, etc.? I will tell you that I was not expecting to enjoy ChatGPT or any AI writing tool. I tend now to love ChatGPT. So what you can do actually is take a lot of your rough information and stick it in ChatGPT and have it tidy it up for you, and then pull it back out and make sure that it's doing what you intend it to do. Now, the trick with ChatGPT, like all computer programs, is to give it the correct instructions. So you want to learn something about how to enter prompts to ChatGPT or other AI tools to get the results that you want out of it. And that may take some practice, but anytime you're doing, and you can use this for practice. I mean, there's a lot of content that's going to go in here. You might try doing a paragraph at a time and say, here's my theme, here's what I'd like to get across, here are some details, put it together for me. It'll come back, maybe it's got too much passive language or it's in a kind of a goofy tone. You can tell ChatGPT, okay, take that thing and now make it in a more serious business-like tone. Or you can say, take all the passive verbs out of this and make it more active. You can tell it to do those things. The beauty for chat GPT in my mind has been that I like to have control over the content, what the ideas are that are going into it in the first place. That you should do yourself. You should not go try to generate ideas from chat GPT. You should have a good idea of what you want to do already. Then give it the stuff, let it massage it, pull it back out, and then edit it. Make sure that you're allowing enough time for that. But what it can do is save you time in that actual composition phase. You do want to be careful of it inserting information that is not correct, because it can do that, especially in topics like environmental issues, because it will pull from the entire internet. And some of those parts are not as reliable as other parts. So you definitely want to be checking for accuracy, your scientific, the truth of what it's saying, how it's saying it. You definitely want to go and edit those things. But I have to admit that I've been using ChatGPT quite a bit lately, and it's been beautiful. It's been actually really helpful. And sometimes when my brain is tired and I have done all the stuff and I stick it in ChatGPT, it comes out better than I could have written it. So sometimes it'll bring in ideas that I hadn't thought of. So use it as a tool. Don't rely on it completely. Make sure that you're editing it well, and I think that it'll do you some good to save you some time. So are there any other questions? That was a great question, Sabine. I appreciate that. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, so I will be also available if you have questions that you think of later and you want to come back and ask them later. That's great. Just send them to Jan and she'll forward them to me. Again, we'll be uploading eventually the video, this video, the outline, the PDF of the slides, the rough budget actual spreadsheet. Oh, that's a good question. All of that will be uploaded, okay, or sent to you by email. I think she's planning to send it by email and then upload it, so it'll be available in several places. So expect more stuff. So Sydney asks, do you have any advice for coordinating writing a grant application with multiple writers? That's a really good question. I've actually never been in the position of writing something with multiple writers, but I do, like I say, oftentimes have other people review and make comments, which is sort of similar. You can possibly have a couple of meetings where you're coordinating what we talked about before, your basic ideas, the chronological layout of the project itself. You want to kind of be all on the same page of what kind of tone you want to set, those kinds of things. And then you might assign sections to different people and have each of you review the other people's written documents. That might be a way to approach that, so that the tone is similar throughout and that you have addressed all the pieces. The beautiful thing about writing with multiple writers is you've got multiple people to look at it, which is great. And people will notice different things, right? So you'll have gaps, and some people will see them and some people won't. So actually probably a big advantage, and take you a little more time to write with multiple writers. What do you think, Sydney? Do you have a specific scenario in mind?
Yeah, hi. My first grant that I and only grant that I've really worked on writing was with a team of people at the conservation district. So we did end up taking different sections and kind of focusing on that. But I think that like having several meetings in the beginning to really make sure you're all on the same page with the timeline and the vision, and like having that foundation. I don't know, like we were kind of putting it together pretty quickly, so I don't know if we necessarily had time to give that part as much as it deserved, as much effort as it deserved. But it was really nice having a lot of people to, do the reviews and check each other's work. And it just took
Yeah.
some more effort at the end to kind of, once everyone's sections were in there, to sew them all together and make sure we weren't like repeating each other too much.
Yeah.
But I really liked
That,
that.
that might be a job for ChatGPT actually, is to take,
Mm,
if you're working with multiple writers, take all the sections and stick it in ChatGPT and say, make the tone similar throughout, make sure that the connections, that the flow is there. That might be something that you could have GPT help you with. Also, something else that you might do if you have multiple writers is identify, this also takes time, but identify who does what well. Maybe you have somebody who does a lot of, who would way rather do research than write. And so have that person go research the grant funder and pull all the information from your long range planning documents and stuff like that. Like you can divide up the tasks and not necessarily the final writing, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Anybody else? Oh, you guys, it's an actual miracle. I think this is the first time I've ever ended a class early. But I hope to see you guys all back at our next at the contracts class next week. Look forward to seeing you again. It's good to see Jenna again. She's come to some of my classes before. And I hope all of you have a great afternoon and hope this was helpful for you. And we'll see y'all later.